For centuries now, some of Britain's most remarkable buildings have remained hidden from public view because they belong to the Ministry of Defence. Now, as part of the peace dividend, many are no longer needed for military purposes. And when conservationists were finally able to view this rich heritage, they were astonished by its scale and range, but also alarmed at the condition of many of the buildings. After allegations of neglect, the military have at last taken steps to improve their record. But is it too late to put their houses in order? Behind these high security fences is one of the defence establishment's best kept secrets. This is Woolwich Arsenal, the huge military industrial complex which produced weapons for the British Army from the Napoleonic Wars to World War II. It's no longer needed, and for the first time, one of the finest collections of military buildings in the world is being opened up to public scrutiny. Experts are astonished at the range and quality of the architecture, including little-known works by the great 18th century architect John Vanbrugh.
These are Vanbrugh buildings which most of us have never really had the opportunity of seeing. The archway, for instance, is characteristic of Vanbrugh, with military references of all kinds, cannonballs piled on top of the gate piers, and matriculation in the form of small arches adjoining it. Behind me, there would have been another row of buildings which have now gone. Indeed, there were so many Vanbrugh buildings here that it was called the Great Pile. It is extraordinary that in works on Vanbrugh that have recently been published, there is almost no mention and very few pictures of any of the Vanbrugh buildings here. It's like uncovering a little-known treasure trove.
If Woolwich is a treasure trove, then over the last few decades, a number of its jewels have gone missing. James Wyatt's cadet quarters were demolished in the 1950s, and as recently as the early 80s, this fine Georgian terrace was pulled down, part of the original Vanbrugh period scheme for Dial Square.
Today I'm surprised and quite horrified to see how little remains of the Arsenal. My favourite building was undoubtedly the Artillery College of the Military College of Science, which was just over here, right opposite my house. We had a large green the size of a football pitch in front of the house, and the other side was this huge building, a sort of a miniature crystal palace. The only records that are available are ones taken of the family, where they all have my mother and various people in the front of them, and none of them are complete. There is not one complete picture of the building.
As more and more access is allowed into this previously hidden world, the accusation is growing that while they were defending the realm, the MOD failed to defend their own heritage.
Security's been very useful to them because they've, to a certain extent, been able to hide behind that. When a heritage organisation like SAVE or the Georgian Society has said, we want to get in, it's been a very lengthy process, and certainly although a few architectural historians have been onto the site, it's not available for you and I to wander around.
Certainly there are signs of real neglect and dereliction at Woolwich. The oldest structures on the site, the Royal Laboratories, have been abandoned to near total decay and now stand deserted and forlorn in the midst of a car park. Built in 1696, the West Pavilion's crest shows the royal cipher of William III. Its companion building is in an even sorrier condition, and both are an English Heritage Register of buildings at risk. Crown immunity, which frees the ministry from the usual buildings controls, is now under review. But critics argue that it's allowed them to neglect or adapt their buildings with little regard for their architectural merit. James Wyatt's Grand Store has been described by historians as the most magnificent warehouse complex in England.
The building is in very bad condition, and it does have inherent structural problems. Because it's festooned with pipes and corrugated iron, you're really unaware of the symmetry that Wyatt based his plan on, a kind of E-plan.
If these buildings at Woolwich were owned by a commercial organisation, they would not have been allowed to do the same kind of alterations that the MOD has done. They would have had to have gone through the normal planning process, that is, the local authority and listed building consent from English Heritage, and it's very unlikely the MOD would have got those consents.
There has been a story of neglect, and but you don't want to generalize too much. One of the difficulties, of course, has been that our primary responsibility is the provision of defence capability. Our primary responsibility isn't conservation.
Conservationists they may not be, but with the demise of the old Property Services Agency, the MOD are now the custodians of an estimated 1,000 listed buildings, almost as many as the National Trust. They range from ornate mess buildings and barracks to historic landmark forts, from ramparts and follies to the strictly utilitarian.
Certainly, the Ministry of Defence has increasingly tried to take its responsibilities seriously. It's only now, I think, that we have had the opportunity, now we've taken the management of our historic estate back from the PSA, the opportunity to look at this systematically. And Woolwich itself is perhaps a very good case in point. There's a lot of dereliction, you've seen it. I dare say that some of the restoration could be improved. We must find a sensible strategy for doing that.
With some of their largest sites, such as the monumental Royal William Yard at Plymouth, the MOD have handed the problem over to a development corporation with a £45 million dowry and a 5-year mission to transform the site into a thriving leisure and tourism centre, an approach which seems to be working with some success at Portsmouth Naval Base. Meanwhile, only last week, a scheme to turn the old Peninsular Barracks in Winchester into flats was approved with the backing of heritage groups. But at Woolwich, the problems are in a different league. Years of neglect and contamination have taken their toll, and current proposals for possible museum or university use will tackle only a fraction of the 76-acre site.
They'd say they've got a policy, but they've got nothing to show for it. At the beginning of this year, they brought out a brochure that is an attempt, I think, to start the sort of ball rolling, but it really is a very glossy sort of PR number and doesn't begin to explain what they're going to do in the future with some of these sites.
This new marketing push is a sign that the men from the military have at last become fully aware of the architectural riches they have under their care. But with the announcement this year of a further 350 historic buildings due to be vacated, it seems that the MOD's new battles with planners, developers and conservationists are set to last well into the next century. If you've ever wondered about the past lives of your home, watch out for the house detectives. For their first assignment, we sent them to a small village in Northamptonshire.
What do we know about this place we're going to?
Well, very little so far, but it's a house called Parva House. It is ostensibly 17th century.
Any sign of a date on it at all?
Yes, there is. There's a mark on the chimney stack, 1631.
So that's a good start, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mac Dowdy is an architectural historian who's made a lifetime study of domestic architecture.
Lovely. Local stuff. All right, so where's that date stone?
David Austin is an archaeologist who specialises in putting buildings into their social context. Together they travel the country, unravelling the history of houses. Parva House is owned by Carol and Brian Harrington, who live there with their son Joseph.
Carol, this is David.
Hello.
And Brian.
Hello. Hello, pleased to meet you.
Well, it's nice of you to let us look at your house.
It's absolutely wonderful. All right, what do you know about it?
Well, we know it was built in 1631, and neighbours have told us it was the manor of Dunkirk, but we're not very sure.
We bought this half originally, and then we bought this half with a sitting tenant, and it seemed to us much older and less messed about with.
In any historical investigation, the first task is to make a detailed survey of the fabric of the building inside and out.
I think it could have been a window at some point.
Ah, no, this is a cloak room.
I expected a baffle so that as you entered in, you had no option. You either turned to your left or to your right.
Soon became obvious that this was no humble cottage. Someone in the 19th century had spent a lot of money on these fixtures and fittings. Gosh, and this really is some attic. This isn't the attic of an ordinary labourer's cottage by any means. This is really good quality work. Somebody was really wanting to live up here properly. The shape of this suggests it's perpendicular Gothic, which is about the 15th century. And indeed it could be of that date. There's one little problem in the fact that it's divided into two, a little bit neatly in a join there, suggests that it might have been built in two parts. In that case, it's something of a copy, a Victorian revival, Gothic revival. But it's a very nice piece, and indeed to find whatever it is. This room seems to have a certain element of status about it, because here we've got a boxed-in axial beam, which is early-ish. It's a nice piece of My first impressions were all leading me to the conclusion that this had been a really good quality building in the 19th century. The next stage in the investigation was to see if we could glean any information about the house or its former owners from documentary evidence. I was looking for anything. Bills, maps, census returns, even wills. Anything that would give us a clue to the occupants of the house. Tying documentary evidence to a building is always difficult, but eventually I found something. It was the 1861 poor rate, a tax on those with money for those without. It consisted of a map and a field book in which every property in the parish was recorded with a list of its occupants. We had found our substantial family of the 19th century, the Shepards. Back at the house, David was pursuing a very different line of inquiry.
Hey, Mac, come quick, have a look at this. Just pulled this out of the rockery.
Good heavens, this is...
It's white limestone, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I think so.
Right.
But
Now look.
they've carved some sort of rebate into this as well.
But here, look, this is moulding on here. And I think perhaps the start of a cusp here? And something in here?
That's right. This is actually, yeah, we're actually looking at it, yeah, down here.
That's right.
So in other words, it would have been horizontal.
Right, okay.
With a curve coming around like this.
So, look at the window.
This is actually set back in.
I think this is a window.
Yeah.
And I think it's been taken out of this building and just dumped in a heap down here. Now this is medieval.
Right.
We were both coming to the conclusion that underneath the smart 19th century interior and the 17th century date stone lay an even older building.
Now then, this is the left-hand side of the building, and I think this is really quite exciting. It's quite revealing. You've got what looks to me at first sight here now, two-storey building with the difference between the stories, between the ground floor and the upper floor, marked by a large line of stones. Now, 2 stories, early date, high status. So perhaps we're looking at the Manor House League here.
I needed further evidence to support my medieval date, and I found it round the corner.
Now, I like this one. It looks like a buttress. It's in the corner of the building, but it's the only one. And it comes from the first floor down to the bottom. Now, what I think this might be is what they called in the Middle Ages a garderobe. That is, it's a toilet shaft. Up there, the highborn ladies and gentlemen, and down here, the serfs taking it all out at the bottom. Hello, my name's David Austin. I just wondered if I could have a
If this was indeed a medieval manor house, it would have been part of a wider complex of buildings. Now, the neighbour's courtyard joining the back of Parva House gave me an idea, but I needed to get a closer look at the barn to check it out.
It certainly looks the oldest part of it.
Well, we have been told it was an old thrashing barn.
Really? That's quite interesting. It could be big enough for that. But actually, what I think we might have is a door here, and there's a lintel, a beam going across the top there, and then you can just see the edge of the wall coming down here, which is the side of the door. And the door
was in there.
Yes.
And then that, look, it lines up with this gate in here, and that's right on alignment with the house, the early part of Parva House in there. So we may be looking at some kind of gatehouse into the original house.
Yes, that's possible.
By now, it was clear we were dealing with a later 15th century manor house, which had remained a significant building right up to the 19th century. So, what had happened to turn it into the semi-detached cottages the Harringtons had bought? The answer was staring us in the face in the shape of nearby Dunkard Hall, built at the turn of the 20th century. So I went off in search of Jack Rogers, who'd worked as a stable lad for the Barnard family in the 1920s, when they had owned both Dunkard Hall and Parva House. So we're coming up to the back of Parva House here, Jack.
Yes.
What do you remember of it as a lad?
Oh, I can remember when Mrs. Barnard, she had it made into 3 sections.
When was that about?
1928.
Right.
And the butler had one part of it, the far end, and the head gardener, Mr. Humphrey, had this end, and my brother, he was chauffeur, and he had this part at the back.
And you lived here?
And I lived there for about 12 months when I first got there. Yeah.
Jack's memories were the final strands of the story we needed to piece together an outline of the history of Parva House. The building that you've got here seems to start around about 1500, and it seems to be a high-status building. In other words, we're looking at something towards the end of the Middle Ages, which is in the manor house bracket, and its original front door was where the back of your house is now. Okay, so it's facing down the slope towards, in fact, a barn in the courtyard which has got double doors in it, which could easily have been a gatehouse into the original house. Now that's well before your date stone of 1631. Still before 1631, the house is lengthened, and then as a third phase, the whole of the roof line is modernised, reorganised, and that's what the date stone of 1631 is about. But still, the front door is in the back of your house, and it's in the 18th century that the whole thing is turned round, new door put where your front is now, and all the windows put in. In fact, formalised, Mac, isn't it?
That's right. When we move into the 19th century, we find the house is being enlarged with an extension that's being put on at what is now the back of the house. We find by the time we get to 1900, however, that Dunkard Parva is going into decline. This is because Dunkard Hall has now been built, and the house now becomes the residence of the principal servants. People like the butler come to live here. Now let's go back a bit into the 19th century, and the principal families that seem to dominate that are the Shepard family and the Duke of Grafton. They seem to be co-equal owners of the whole area of Dunkard. And we come to 1861, and this is the census return. The owner is a Samuel Shepard. This is his wife, Mary. They have 7 children and 1 servant who is listed living in. One other nice little gem that we've got from the County Record Office is Samuel and Mary Shepard.
They look very fine, don't they?
They do, really grand people.
I'm very pleased.
I'm sure. We are too. And what is really nice is that Samuel and Mary never left Dunkard.
We made one more discovery during the filming, which took us all completely by surprise. Hidden away in the back garden of a neighbouring cottage were the remains of the former chapel graveyard. We had accidentally stumbled on the final resting place of the entire Shepard clan.
Samuel and Mary, look.
Yes, they turn out to be brother and sister. The couple we were looking at in the photograph are there, Samuel, Mary.
Okay.
But just look around at all these shepherds here.
Francis,
Francis. Yes, she's...
Mac Dowdy and David Austin. And if you think your house might be a candidate for our detectives, write and tell us why, enclosing a photograph of your home. We'll be giving you the address in a moment. And thank you to all of you who've written in with suggestions for our List It campaign. It's not too late to take part, so if there's a favourite post-war building which you think deserves to be listed, write and let us know. Once more, enclosing a photograph, please. The address for both is 1 Foot in the Past, BBC Kensington House, Richmond Way, London, W14 OAX. Please mark your envelope either House Detectives or List It. I'll be back next week when Lucinda Lambton visits Hawkstone, the Thorpe Park of the 18th century, and we examine the controversy about the restoration of our historic buildings. Until then, goodbye.
Yeah, follow that.
That's very similar shape to the left one. That's the edge of it going up.
Yes. That looks
and he
like...
stops and then goes back in, and then actually another one where we're thinking of, you can see that. That's the corner of another one.
Yeah, understood, we see that.
Can we linger there? Back across it.
All stop there, Kev, all stop there.
Are we saying that's the fluted part of the column wrong? I can't see a flute. I saw something.
No, we saw was one...
Yes.
It should be very distinctive, so the...
See, I'm wondering if it might be sort of even like these.
Well,
It
could be,
It could be, you see.
How many of those, you see those fluted channels that are going up that piece of stone?
Thursday night and a chance to see the rescheduled gala concert We'll Meet Again, where Dame Vera Lynn and Bob Hope pay a moving musical tribute to the veterans of D-Day. We'll Meet Again, Thursday, 8 o'clock on BBC One.